So I'll get started. So yes, I'm Dylan Losey. I'm really happy to be here with you guys virtually to talk about my work. This might be maybe a different perspective on kind of how we can bring humans and robots together. So I want to start off by just showing a few examples of robots out in the world doing things. Here we've got a self-driving car in the Bay Area that's trying to make an unprotected left turn. You can see it's not doing a great job of making that turn. We've got cars on both sides and bicyclists backed up, waiting for this car to make the turn. Here I've got a video. This is a surgical robot, a minimally invasive surgical robot, intuitive robot arm. And what I want to emphasize in this video is kind of how this whole system works. So you can have a doctor who is teleoperating this robot. He's controlling it. He's watching what the robot sees using cameras. And then he's going to use his own hands to try to control how this robot moves around. And when I say robot, it's not just one arm. It's a series of 3 or 4 different arms that are all sort of working together to try to perform this surgery and sort of inside the person's body. So he gets cameras, he gets force feedback, he gets this information about what's going on during this procedure. And the last robot I want to show, this one's kind of near and dear to my heart. This is a wheelchair-mounted robot arm. The gentleman is using this arm to do basic tasks. You open his fridge, grab things from the shelf. You might notice on the bottom right that he's got a joystick, and he's using his hand to try to move the joystick and control that robot arm just to do everyday things. And this is for someone who might have a long-term physical disability or impairment that prevents them from doing these tasks by themselves, but enables them now with the robot arm to do these sort of different things. So kind of, a common thing that I saw across all these different applications of robots working with humans out in the real world, and something that I think about a lot is, in all these scenarios, there's obviously an exchange of information from the person to the robot. Like I'm telling that robot arm where to go. I'm trying to control that surgical device. I'm telling it what to do. But there's also feedback from the robot back to the human, right? This is it's a bi-directional information exchange. Right now, the robot can tell me force and perception and things that it's seeing inside the human's body, or it can maybe sense how heavy or light a thing is. It can provide me feedback about what's going on in the world around me. And so I want to kind of try to formulate human-robot interaction as a channel that enables this bi-directional communication. So I'll start off this talk with, we got the human, we got the robot, we've got human-robot interaction, right? That's this thing that we kind of want to understand and use. And at the start of this talk, we've got both human and robot are totally confused. Like neither of them have a good mental model of the other. We don't really know what's going on. We're going to try to use human-robot interaction to enable this bi-directional communication. And really, that's kind of the thesis I want to suggest, which is that interaction could be used to build a mutual understanding between robots and users. And I always use robots, but you can also think about that as just an intelligent machine or an agent, autonomous agent that's working with a human. So we want to build this mutual understanding, and I've got some photos here. These are mostly from my group here at Virginia Tech. We've been trying to work on this thesis or this larger problem for a while. And I want to show today 3 different solutions that we've come up with so far to try to build out this diagram. So the first thing I want to talk about is, I think the one that's maybe the most obvious to me as a roboticist, which is, I've got this human, right? They're doing things, they're controlling the robot arm, they're telling what to do, they're moving it around. That's really a source of information, right? I have all this data available to me. It would be amazing if I could take that data and extract something meaningful from it. And so the first way I want to apply human-robot interaction is a way to learn from people. So I'm going to go back to this wheelchair-mounted robot arm. This is kind of the application I stick with a lot in this talk. And one thing we noticed when we were talking with these users and watching videos from these users is that they repeat important tasks all the time. Like opening your fridge, it's not like you just open your fridge once in your life. You're going to open your fridge many times every day. And that actually is really powerful, because if we know that people are doing important tasks on a daily basis, we can actually build up a knowledge base from those tasks in order to help them do those tasks. So let's see how we do that. I want to start off by just trying to formulating this problem more broadly in a robotics context. So let's say you are controlling your wheelchair-mounted robot arm. You're looking at a table in front of you with all these different things on it, and you're using a joystick to move that robot arm around. It doesn't have to be a joystick. A joystick's that's the most common in the field for what people actually use, but it doesn't have to be. It could be you can move your chin, you can use your eyes, you can use gaze, you can use sip and puff devices. So EMG, EEG, you have a way of controlling your robot arm, right? And let's say you wanted to move around, you wanted to do things in the world. Well, there is an existing field that kind of explores this, and this field is called shared autonomy. And the idea here is that within shared autonomy, the human and the robot are going to work together to complete this task. Neither the human or robot does it completely in isolation. we combine our expertise, we combine our skills, and we do this task together. So the way that this has been set up, and I've cited 5 different works here that I think are pretty representative in the past, is that we as designers give the robot a set of tasks that the robot might want to perform beforehand. We say, hey, here are 10 different things that you might want to do. And then the robot tries to figure out during the current interaction with the human, which of these tasks does the human really want? So let's see an example of that. You've got your robot arm above this table, and I've told the robot 2 possible tasks that you might have. You might want to reach for the pen, you might want to reach for the paper. And at the beginning of the task, the robot's like, beginning of this interaction, the robot's like, I don't know which of these 2 tasks you want to do. I'm 50-50 on each. As you start controlling this robot arm and moving it around, you start going towards the pen. And now the robot's like, okay, I got it. You are moving towards this pen. I understand that you probably want me to do this task. I can help automate. I can help you do that with you. So I can now guide this robot arm to reach for the pen and complete the task autonomously. Similarly, if you were to go about and start reaching for the paper instead, the robot again, okay, I got it. You're reaching for the paper. Let me help you do that. And so the robot will provide velocity commands to help move that arm to correctly pick up the paper. And you can probably guess, what I want to say here. What's the key limitation of that? Well, the issue with what I've seen in prior work is that you have to specify all those tasks beforehand. If I go back, you have to tell the robot, hey, one possible task is reaching for this notepad. Another one is opening this door. You have to tell it all these possible tasks. And that just is not reasonable to do in a real world where we're rolling out these robots with people who knows what tasks they're going to want to do and who knows what tasks are important to them. So what I wanted to do in this project, and kind of what we've been focusing on, is how we can use the repeated nature of everyday tasks in order to learn to assist humans, but crucially without any pre-specified tasks. We're not going to tell the robot beforehand, like, hey, these are the 10 things the human might want to do. The robot has to figure everything out only from the data that's available to it without any sort of underlying assumptions about this world. So how do we do that? Well, I first want to just introduce a little math to make it clear what the robot knows and what it actually has access to. So during the current interaction, I'm going to call I the current interaction, the robot observes the human's behavior. This is kind of what I'm doing with the joystick. And really that behavior, it's a trajectory. It's a set of states that we visit and the actions that I take. These states, they could be camera images, joint positions of the robot, actions or things like velocity commands, or even just how I move the joystick. So I've got the trajectory from the current interaction. And it's not like I only interacted with this human one time, right? Like the person has bought this assistive robot arm, they're using it on a daily basis. And so I've got a data set that I'm building up of these repeated interactions. I'm going to call that D. So, and that's it. Like that is the information that I as a robot have access to. I know where I am right now. I know my current state. I know the trajectory that the human's following right now. I know tau I. And I've got D, this data set of all the previous interactions that I've seen. I want to emphasize that what I've shown you so far, this information, there is absolutely no encoding of tasks so far. We haven't specified tasks. We haven't said anything about them. This is just the data that the robot has without any sort of assumptions. So using just that data, we came up with an algorithm that's going to try to help people do tasks. And we call this, we didn't really have a name for it, but we split it up into 3 parts: recognize, replicate, and return. So I want to kind of walk you through this algorithm so you can see how it works. We're going to start off on the left with recognizing. And the idea here is we're going to take the current interaction, this tau I, with the sort of states and the actions the human provides. I'm going to embed that to a latent space. I'm going to call that latent space, really it's a representation of what I think this task is. So I'm going to take this high dimensional trajectory, embed it down to some Z, and that Z is what I predict the human wants to do. Then I'm going to take that prediction and I'm try to condition my behavior on that prediction so that I do sort of what the human showed me before for that task. So if I predict, hey, it looks like the human is trying to do the opening the refrigerator task, let me roll out behavior that's similar to what the human's done before. I can basically help them automate that task by replaying things that they've shown me. This is the robot's assistive policy to help out the human. And finally, and this is kind of really important from a control perspective, if I take over and I start to try to automate this task and help this human out, we're going to be in big trouble if the human actually did not mean to do that task, right? Like if human starts moving for the fridge and then they change their mind, like, no, actually, I want to grab this cup. And then it's like, no, I'm going to keep going to the fridge. I'm not listening to you. We have a problem. And so the way we get around that is we also train a classifier or a discriminator that's going to be basically take in what's going on right now, this current interaction. And it's going to say, is this something I've seen before and I can help the human with? Or is this something that's different than anything I've seen before and I should just let the human take over and do this by themselves? So We train all three of these modules together, the encoder, the policy, and the discriminator. We train all three of these things together with a single loss function that is essentially just taking in the data from these data, the entire data set D. So it's going to iterate over all the examples of interactions I've seen before and try to train each of these separate things so that I can now learn to help the human in the future. So a big question that came to mind for me when we were doing this is, what I've described is pretty similar to something called imitation learning. And in imitation learning or behavior cloning, the robot just tries to match the human's behavior. And there's a large body of work on this. And so a question that comes up is like, hey, have we just like reinvented the wheel? Have we just reinvented imitation learning? Is what we're talking about just the exact same as what's being done before? And so this first thing I want to show is kind of it was done on a real robot, but we simulated the human to try to make it as controlled as possible. And we try to compare to a state-of-the-art imitation learning approach called Dagger. This 3 and 5, Dagger 3 versus Dagger 5, that's just how many demonstrations we gave the robot of these different tasks. It's either reach for this can of soup or reach for this notepad. So Dagger 3, it's reached for the notepad 3 times. Dagger 5, it's reached for the notepad 5 times before. So it has more data basically to learn from. And as you might expect, when you have more data, you're going to get a little bit more precise. Your final state error is going to go down. You're going to reach for these objects more accurately. Excuse me. But once we add in our approach, we start to see this difference. We're able to more accurately reach these objects. And the key difference between what we've done and what has been done in the past with this imitation learning framework is, imitation learning, that just learns to copy the human. So if I go back to this diagram, imitation learning focuses on replicating, just matching the behavior I've seen before. I'm going to do that again. What it really misses out on is the first block and the last block. It doesn't have any sort of idea of conditioning on tasks or embedding to tasks. And it also has no way of returning control back to the human when they make a mistake. So what we found kind of in the simulation is that including an understanding of, hey, there are tasks here. I don't know necessarily what they are a priori, but I can learn and embed these tasks. That's actually going to improve our performance in this system. Okay, so perhaps this is a little bit vague so far, just because of the way I've been explaining it. But I want to make it a bit more concrete by showing some user studies. So let's see this in practice. I want to basically break this user study up into 3 parts. First, we're going to talk about kind of a comparison to baselines, and then move on to more complex scenarios. So in this first part of the user study, I started this off by saying, hey, there are the existing methods where the robot has prior knowledge over the goals. Like I know it's either the cup or the pen or the paper. I know you've got these different goals in mind. Let's see if our approach can do just as well as those things, as long as it's got some experience of reaching for these objects. So I'll play this slide twice because it goes pretty fast. On the left, you're going to see kind of this prior work that focuses on prior knowledge over these different goals. In the middle, that's our approach. And on the right, that's a plot of the human effort. Let me go back one more time and show this again. We also notice these circles that change from gray to purple or gray to orange. That's when the robot's like, hey, I know what's going on. I can take over and help you automate that task. So after that point, sure, the human can control it with the joystick if they want, but the robot's like, it already knows what to do. It's trying to help them finish the task. Kind of what we saw from these videos and the plot on the right is they are very similar. And that's what we kind of wanted to see. When the robot has prior knowledge of the task, whether that's from previous experience, or we just tell the robot explicitly, hey, these are the tasks, either way, the robot will be able to help you. We can figure out what you're trying to do and help you do that thing. Where I think this gets more exciting, though, is when we try to do a task that we've never told the robot about before. It has to figure out how to learn this new task from scratch and how to help the person do that task without any prior knowledge. So, of course, there's no free lunch, right? So the way this works is the human's going to do this task a few times by themselves. And here it's more of a skill. They're trying to open this drawer. And so the human, by themselves, they open this drawer, I think 5 or so times. And then we take the learned behavior and we let the sort of robot try to help see if it can assist you on this new task. And again, we've got the kind of these, I'm going to play this again. You can see this human leading versus robot leading in the bottom. The robot quickly is like, hey, I know what task you're trying to do. I can do that for you. It takes over and automates the task. On the right, you'll notice, I think the key difference here, which is like how much work the human has to do in order to open this drawer. In gray, that is going to be like the human controlling it basically the entire time. Like they have no robot assistance. They have to go through the entire process. In orange, that's when the robot's like, hey, I can use this approach to try to automate and assist. So now, basically, we cut it in half. The human only has to get the task started, and then the robot can take over and do everything else from there. One other kind of concern that I had with this approach was just kind of what's the capacity of this model to learn? Can I only learn how to do one task, 3 tasks? What happens when I learn new tasks? Do I push out those old tasks? Can I remember across multiple different interactions with the person a variety of different tasks? And so here we're going to kind of go back to the original tasks, this original set of just reaching for these objects after we've trained the robot new skills, and just see, do we remember what we saw before? On the left was just training the robot to only learn this skill for picking up this particular notepad. In the middle, the robot is trained across a variety of different tasks, and now it's going back to this original task. And then on the right, you can see again this human effort. How much work did the human have to do? Let me play that again. One more back. There we go. How much work did the human have to do? And again, what we're kind of excited about here is that whether you train the robot only on demonstrations of a single task or on demonstrations of all the different tasks, you get about the same performance. The robot still knows how to help the human and kind of cut their effort in half. So to summarize this first step of the process, we're excited about using the fact that people interact with these robots on a daily basis. They do important things on a daily basis. There's a lot of data there. And we're excited about extracting data from these repeated interactions in order to autonomously learn to help people do tasks around their house. So that's kind of this first arrow, right? That's, I've got the data from the human. I'm now learning from that data, and I can help the person. I'm building a model of what the person wants me to do, and I can now help the person by using that model. But I have a pretty big issue with what we've discussed so far and just the way we've been thinking about the human. So far, the robot has been treating the human as if they were a robot. We haven't considered the human's feelings. We haven't considered, what makes us human? Our nuances, our differences in ability and disability. We're just taking it as, hey, this is a robot. This is the data we're providing. We're going to work with that. So in the second part of this brief talk, I want to sort of explain one way in which we can make this learning a bit more human-like. One way we can treat these agents more like the people that they are. And so the thing I want to focus on is actually just grounded in my work on robots for people who have physical disabilities, is the person's level of ability to provide a demonstration physically. How good are they at showing the robot what they want? So on the left, this is kind of the demonstration that I want to show the robot. I want to show the robot how to carry this cup of coffee perfectly upright the entire time. That's my goal. That's what I would like to show. On the right, I've got some physical limitations. I'm not a perfect actor. Maybe I'm young, old, I'm inexperienced. I've got limitations physically that are preventing me from doing what I want. So I can't show the robot exactly what I meant. And as a result, I'm tilting this cup, even though that's not really what I wanted to show. So here's a pretty big gap, right? There's what I wanted versus what I demonstrated. How do we close that gap? How do we make it so that the robot can learn what we meant, even if we weren't able to show exactly that thing? Again, I want to kind of frame this in a broader perspective. A lot of work in robotics thinks about this as a inverse reinforcement learning problem. And really all that means is the human's going to show demonstrations. The robot's going to try to extract a sense of what it is the human's optimizing for. What does the human really want to do? And then the robot's going to optimize for that thing. Like, you showed me this is what you meant. Okay, now I can figure out how to do that thing the best I can. So we're going to frame this as an inverse reinforcement learning problem. The human provides a demonstration, and I've shown this demonstration in green. I'm going to use Xi to signify the demonstration that the human provides. Now, the human has a variety of different demonstrations they can provide. And this is going to be really an important term that I'm going to introduce here that we use in the talk is the human's choice set. And what I mean by that, what I mean by a choice set is that's supposed to be the set. It could be either discrete or continuous of all the different things I could have chosen to show the robot, all the different things I could have provided as my inputs. So in this particular application, it would be all the different trajectories that I could guide the robot around. That would be my choice set. Of course, the robot doesn't necessarily know what my choice set is. It doesn't know what I'm capable of and what I'm not capable of. So it's going to have an estimate. And we're going to call that estimate capital Xi R. That's going to be the robot's estimate of the human's choice set. For example, the robot could say, hey, you could provide any demonstration. Anything's valid. Or it could say only things that are very close to the demonstration you provided, you can only do that. So given this kind of framework, how does the robot learn? What's the math behind what's going on? Well, it's not too complex. What the robot's going to try to do is try to learn the human's objective, the human's reward function, you could say. And one way to do this is through Bayesian inference. So the robot is going to try to figure out what is the probability of a reward function given the demonstration that the human provided and my estimate of the human's choice set, Xi R. We can use Bayes' theorem to kind of reverse this, and then we can use a relatively common model of the human, of how humans provide these demonstrations. We're going to use this Boltzmann rational model. This cognitive model basically says that people will provide demonstrations that are approximately optimal for what they want to do. They may not be perfect. I can't show exactly what I meant, but I'm going to try to show something pretty close. When we kind of break that mathematical model open, we come up with a way to update the robot's estimate of what the human's reward function is. The key that I want to focus on in this equation is going to be in the denominator. And it's the way that the robot normalizes the demonstration the human actually provided by considering all the other alternatives that the human could have shown. You showed me option A, but you could have shown me option B, C, D, so on and so forth. So what do I learn by comparing option A to these other options that you did not pick, right? So kind of knowing what you did pick is just as important as knowing what you chose not to provide. To just put that another way and maybe more visually explain this concept. So it could be, if I'm the robot, I'm thinking about this is what the human provided. Again, I'm trying to show the actual demonstration in green. The robot could treat this human as if they were a robot and say, hey, just like a robot, you could show me any possible demonstration. You could move directly from the start to the goal. You can move in this wavy line. You could tilt the cup. You can do anything, right? There's no limitations on the human. An alternative that I'm kind of excited about, and you'll hopefully see why, is for the robot to be a bit more restrictive and say, you provided me one demonstration. I don't think you can provide any possible demonstration. I think your choice set is pretty close to what you've shown me originally. So you can only provide me demonstrations that kind of mess up and tilt the cup, so on and so forth. Just like taking a step back, when the robot is trying to learn from the human, it's crucial to know what other options the human could provide. Unfortunately, robots are never going to know exactly what the human's choice set is. We can try to estimate it, we can try to learn it, but we're inevitably going to get something wrong here. We're going to either overestimate or underestimate the human's capabilities. So what's the right way to do it? Should we play it safe and underestimate what the human could do, or should we be more aggressive and overestimate the human's capabilities? Here, I'm going to use overestimate. It's going to be in gray in all these slides. And what it is, it just means that the robot thinks, the choice set the robot thinks the human has is bigger than the choice set the human actually has. So Xi H is a subset of Xi R. Underestimating is the converse. That's where we're going to say, hey, I think the human's really bad. I don't think they can provide very many demonstrations. So I'm going to say that Xi R is a subset of Xi H. So I want to analyze this along two different axes. The first is confidence, and the second is worst case performance. So confidence, that's going to have to deal with the robot's belief, what it's learned. How confident is the robot in what it's learned? Now, the gold standard would be if the robot knew exactly what the human's choice set is. Then it could figure out exactly how confident it should be based on the human's demonstrations. When the robot messes up, when it overestimates the human's capabilities, it's going to be overly confident in what it has learned. And what I mean by that is that if the robot's going to commit, it's going to say, hey, you showed me this thing. Therefore, you clearly want to tilt the cup. That's what you wanted. I'm going to do that thing. I'm committed to that. When robots are conservative and they underestimate the human's capabilities, they play it safe. As opposed to being confident and like locking into a specific reward function, they keep a broad spectrum of possible reward functions and think many of these different things could be likely. I'm not sure yet. Okay, so that's confidence. One is overconfident, one's underconfident. What about worst case? So the best the robot could possibly do is to learn exactly what the human wants, right? I mean, that's what we want to do at the end of the day. We want to learn what it is this human wants the robot to do, carry this cup upright. So in the best case, the robot learns that. In the worst case, when a robot overestimates the human's capabilities, it gets it wrong and it commits to getting it wrong. So it says, you show me this demonstration where you tilted the cup and you poured out water. You must have meant that. You want to tilt out the cup and pour water. So I'm going to learn that. I'm going to be completely confident that you want to pour water across the table. In the worst case, when robots underestimate the human's capabilities, they essentially learn nothing. They just stick with whatever prior they had over the task and do not update that prior. Intuitively, what you can think about here is the robot just says, hey, this human is so bad. I can't think about any, whatever they provided, that's the only option they had available. I can't learn anything from that. I'm just going to stick with what I knew before. So putting that all together, if you're kind of thinking about as a designer, which side of this question we should err on, should we overestimate or underestimate humans' capabilities? And I think this is more broad than just this application in robotics. So it was an interesting question to think about. If you're going to overestimate, if you're going to assume that humans are maybe more capable than they actually are, you're going to be a bit more risk-seeking. You will learn quickly, but you could get it wrong. And when you get it wrong, you're going to commit to that mistake. On the other hand, if you play it safe and you underestimate the human's capabilities, You will be a bit more conservative. You won't learn as quickly, but you will maintain several possible explanations for the human's behavior. You will kind of account for their limitations as you learn. And that kind of leads me to our hypothesis, given this analysis that we've done, is that if we want robots to really be inclusive, if we want robots to think about the people they're working on as people, we should err towards underestimating humans' capabilities. We should play it safe. Instead of assuming that everyone is perfectly capable and provide every demonstration, we should limit ourselves to think about, hey, you can only provide demonstrations at your own level of ability. So how do we do this? Again, kind of think about how we would try to formulate this more mathematically. What we're going to do is we're going to take the humans' original demonstrations, what they actually showed us, and then we're going to apply perturbations to these. We're going to apply noisy deformations. We're going to make them more sparse. We're going to kind of block them up into these consistent inputs. We're going to put all those different perturbations together, and that's going to be our choice set. So the things that we think the human can provide are their original demonstration and essentially noisy perturbations of that original demonstration. Then we're going to try to take that combined choice set that we think is similar to what the human could do, and we're certainly underestimating the human's capabilities, and try to learn from that. So let's see this in practice. Let's try to make this a bit more concrete. So I've got it on the left. This is a game. It's called Lunar Lander. And in this game, you as a human, you got a kind of a joystick, and you're trying to land this hovercraft on the moon. This is on the surface of the moon. You've got these two flags. You want to get your robot to slow down, stop, and land on the surface of the moon. But it's really hard to play this game because things are moving quickly. The dynamics are complex. You know, I've seen this many times. I'm still not very good at the game. So these are an example of the demonstrations you might provide. Obviously, this is not what you meant. You were just like crashing to the ground, like nothing's going right here. But this is the best you can do. When we overestimate the human's capabilities, i.e., we stick with prior work and just say, hey, the human, you could provide any demonstration. Anything's fine. I'm just going to learn from it. We learn to match what the human does. So we also just go straight down, crash into the moon, not successful. This changes when we start to underestimate the human's capabilities. We recognize the human is doing their best to try to slow down and land between these two flags. Now, they're not doing it. They're not succeeding in their demonstrations, but they're trying to do that. I can extrapolate that by comparing what they showed me to things that are kind of similar to what they showed me. And I'll figure out, hey, what they really wanted was to land on the surface of the moon. And then I can go about, okay, I can help you do that. I can figure out how to optimize for that. I can plan for that. I can make sure that this happens. So we did this in simulation. We also tried this out in a real world setting. So this one is going to be, again, the human's using a joystick to control this robot. On the left is the demonstration they provided. They cannot provide a great demonstration because we've got this vase of flowers in the middle of the table. And the person has to move. They're trying to drop off this piece of paper, this garbage, into a bin, but they can't reach there because they have to go around these flowers, and that's kind of preventing them from reaching their goal. So they try to get as close as they can, but ultimately they get stuck. In the middle, I'm showing kind of one of the state-of-the-art approaches. It's not the only, but one state-of-the-art approach to this problem called Bayesian inverse reinforcement learning. And what's crucial here is that the robot assumes you can provide any demonstration. I'm going to overestimate the choice set. Anything is possible. And the robot just learns like, hey, I think what you wanted was to drop off this trash in the bin. I'm going to do that. But it doesn't think at all about, oh, there's probably a reason why the human tried to do it in this way. I'm just going to go straight through the vase. And I've drawn a like broken vase there because we couldn't actually put the physical vase. The robot would just go right through it and smash it. On the right is kind of a measure of performance. This is called regret, and it's the difference between the robot's optimal behavior and how it actually behaved. We want this to be as low as possible. So one other baseline, I think is another exciting baseline, is something where the robot only considers noisy perturbations of what the human applied. They take the human's original demonstration, they compare that to just adding noise to that demonstration, just adding some Gaussian white noise, and they say, I'm going to learn from that. That kind of works. It's getting in the right direction. And about half the time that thing learns to avoid the vase, half the time it learns to just go straight through the vase and break it. It's getting better. The regret is decreasing. This last one I want to show, this is kind of our approach, which considers not only noisy perturbations, but also other ways in which you can try to find this choice set, such as these sparse inputs or consistent inputs. And this one, the robot learns like, I understand not only what the human showed me, but what they wanted me to do. They wanted me to try to avoid this vase and drop off this paper in the bin. That's what they meant. So to kind of put that all together, the takeaway that, or at least the idea that we're trying to work towards, is we want to make these robot learners more inclusive. Instead of only working for experts or only working for people who have a lot of experience controlling robots, I would love to see these robots also be able to learn from and understand just average everyday people who are working with them. And a key step towards that is interpreting the demonstrations that the human provides, or any input that the human provides, in the context of alternatives that human can actually provide and actually give to the robotic system. I kind of want to leave this as a bit of an open question as well. What I've showed you is kind of our best guess so far as to how to provide these alternatives. I would leave it up to you to think about other ways to provide these alternatives, and we are still actively thinking about ways to improve this moving forward, to see if we can come up with a more standardized way of doing this. But I definitely think there's a lot of potential here in order to make robots more inclusive when they work with people. Okay, so now we've got this robot. The robot's thinking about the person, and it's starting to think about this person as a real person, right? We're considering different limitations of the person, their abilities, etc. The last step in this diagram is now to take what the robot has learned, all this information the robot has gathered, maybe these models, the equations, the reward function, take all this information and see if we can convey that back to the human, because it would be awesome. You know, this is a bidirectional information transfer, right? We originally said human-robot interaction, that's a way for both of us to exchange information. It would be great if the human could also learn something from these interactions and understand, what is it that my robot is thinking? What is it planning to? What is its intention? What can I do when I'm working with the system? So we want to enable robots to make their learning more clear to the people they're around. I want to, that's a very broad question. And I want to try to hone in on one specific area where I think this comes into play. Specifically, I'm going to think about active learning. So active learning is a framework where the robot is going to try to probe the human by asking questions. These questions, they could be verbal, but one more common way to do that is by showing alternatives. So the robot's going to show you two different trajectories, like the one on the left, the one on the right, and then you pick, hey, I prefer this one on the left, that matches my preferences, I would like you to do that. And you just tell the robot, the first one, that's my favorite. Another example, the robot shows this one on the left and one on the right. You say, okay, maybe this one, I like the second one. That one's better. That's my preference. I'm going to pick that. There's a lot of work on these, sort of how the robot can generate these questions. How does the robot pick the questions that it shows you? And if we only think about this problem from the robot's perspective, it's pretty well understood. The robot is going to try to ask questions to learn from you as quickly as possible. The idea being that I don't want to waste time asking you tons and tons of questions that are irrelevant. I want to get to the meat of the matter as quickly as I can. So to see how that works mathematically, let Q be the robot's question. Again, that's just going to be a set of different options. Lowercase q, that's going to be the human's answer. Hey, that's the one I like. That's my favorite of these options. Theta, that's going to be, again, that's my reward function. That's what the human really wants. The robot doesn't know that. It's trying to figure that out through interaction. What is it the human really wants me to do? It's trying to learn this theta. And then this I, this is information gain. And to put that more intuitively, if I give you answer Q to question capital Q, how much information does the robot actually gain about theta, what the robot is trying to learn from the human? Of course, I want to maximize that. I want to learn, I want to gather as much information about theta as I can from as few questions as I can. And so robots within this active learning framework, they're going to greedily maximize the robot's information gain. They're going to choose that question Q star, which no matter how the human answers that question, I'm going to get as much information as I can about theta. So this is pretty clear. And I'm going to call this, just for the sake of comparison, I'm going to call this an informative question. I'm going to color it in green throughout the rest of this talk. So green, these are the informative questions. This is when the robot is trying to gather its information as quickly as it can. And that's kind of where I think the state of the art ends. We stop there. Now, what I want to think about is what these questions look like when we see. From the human's perspective, what do we see when we see these informative questions? Well, I'm going to show this video twice because it's kind of a lot going on quickly. This is a human that is watching the robot ask a series of 8 different questions. And each of these questions, the robot shows you 2 options, I1, I2. It's up to you to pick your favorite. The human, we've asked this human, what do they prefer? And they told us they want the robot to stack these dishes, these like white and green dishes. They want the robot to stack the dishes, and they want the robot to carry these dishes kind of close to the table. So ideally, the robot's going to move right along the top of the table and just end right above the other dishes. Okay, so I've explained the setting. Now let's look at these questions. So question 1, these are the 2 different options human sees. Question 2, again, first option, second option. Think about what you get when you see these questions. Like, what does this make you think? When I see these questions, it makes me think the robot has no clue what's going on, right? It's like changing, it's folding things at the elbow, it's stopping the middle, it's not doing what I want, right? None of these questions are really doing things the way I wanted the robot to do. So when I see those 8 questions, I'm like, this robot has learned absolutely nothing. Like whatever's going on, I'm confused, I don't get it. And that kind of brings me to a bigger point again, which is robot learning becomes a black box from the human's perspective. I provide my inputs, I provide this data, I provide these suggestions, I provide my answers, whatever the case may be. I provide this information, and then I'm just kind of left in the dark as to what the robot has learned. And that's not just for a novice everyday user. That's for me, as someone who's designing these robots and writing these algorithms. I have no clue what's going on under the hood. I have to find a way to sort of evaluate that. I have to come up with some diagnostic to figure out what's going on, but it's completely a black box. So let's see how we can open that box. How can we make it clear what's going on? And one kind of insight that we had had this when I was driving around. The way that the questions the robot asks, the way the robot chooses which questions to show you, that actually tells me a lot. When I see those questions, it makes me as a human think things about what the robot has learned. To give an example, let's say I've got a self-driving car, and the self-driving car is trying to figure out how to drive around Blacksburg. And it shows me two options. One where it just blazes through the stop sign, it doesn't stop, it just keeps going, full speed. And a second option where it correctly stops at the stop sign. Now, when I see that question, I immediately think, hey, this robot, this self-driving car, doesn't know what to do with stop signs. It's trying to get that information. It's trying to learn that from me. So the way the robot picks those questions, that conveys a lot of information to the human. It conveys what the robot knows and what it doesn't know. So let's see if we can use that intuition or to make robot questions more revealing to the human, to make them more informative for the human. So from the robot's perspective, the robot's going to try to learn a belief over the human's reward function. The robot's trying to learn what it is that the human really wants that robot to optimize for, what it should be doing in the world. And as the robot collects this belief, it also learns how to behave. It learns, hey, you've taught me to stop at stop signs, so I'm going to do that. That's the right way to behave in the world. If I was to stop teaching the robot and just roll it out right now, Z is going to be kind of how that robot would behave, what I would expect it to do in the world. Now, from my perspective as a human, again, I can't see what's going on under the robot's hood. I can only answer the questions the robot asks me. I just see a sequence of questions. And I try to figure out from all those questions the robot has asked, I'm trying to guess, hey, what has this robot learned? What has it not learned? What's going on? And what we kind of done, I'm going to skip the details here, is we've developed a mental model that the human has so that they can extrapolate from, hey, you've shown me these questions. I can then extrapolate what I think this robot knows based on the questions it's asking. And intuitively, what's going on in that model is the human is expecting the robot to ask questions that represent what the robot knows. We're expecting the robot to, if you're uncertain about stopping at stop sign, I expect you to ask a question about that. So what do we do? I mean, we've got a mental model. We've kind of thrown that out there. Let's see if it works. Let's try to test it out. So we did this to ask revealing questions. And I want to kind of compare and contrast these informative and revealing questions. Again, the human wants this robot to carry these plates and stack them on top of each other. And the robot so far has learned one thing. It has learned to stack, but it does not know another thing. It does not know the right height to carry these plates. So you'll see in the informative question, the robot shows one demonstration where it goes close to the table, another one where it goes really high up. And the robot might ask this question because it gives it a lot of information about this height. How high should I go? But from the human's perspective, when I see this question, I think, hey, you don't know the right height, but you also don't know to stack the plates, right? Because one option stacks, the other one doesn't. So you must not know about whether or not to stack the plates. From my perspective as a human, a better question would be what's shown in blue in the middle. This one, the robot has two different trajectories, one that goes high and then low, one that goes low then high, but they both end up stacking the plates. So this tells me as the user, when I see this, hey, you don't know how to go low and high. You're clearly varying that. You're clearly adjusting that. But you definitely know where to put these plates. You understand that part of the task. So these are kind of like two ends of a spectrum, being informative, gathering information from the human, and being revealing and showing that information back to the human. Like we said at the beginning, like this is a bidirectional information exchange, right? And so we try to formulate this into a single optimization law that the robot could use to figure out what question can I ask right now that's going to be both informative, right? It's going to give me information about what the human wants me to do, and revealing. It's going to show the human what I've learned. What we kind of learned when we found this law and sort of analyzed is that when robots do this, when they trade off between gaining and revealing information, there's a trend. They start off by asking you questions that are kind of opaque, but very informative. You don't know what the robot's learning, but it is learning a lot at the very beginning. And then as the robot starts to get a better mental model of what you want, it then hones in on actually revealing information to you because it's already learned. It already pretty much knows what you want to learn. So now we can just focus on showing you that information back and be a more revealing system. So this, going back to this example, this is kind of what I would like to see, as a human and as a robot. So the robot shows one example, one part of this, one of these trajectories that always goes low. it ends up at the plates. The other option goes really high and it ends up at the plates. Both of these options end up at the plate, so I know, hey, the robot understands the stack, but they've got very different heights. So the robot's confused about this part of the task. And when I answer this, now the robot can learn, hey, should I go high or should I go low? Okay, so let's see, a big hypothesis here is whether or not people actually can learn from questions. Like when I see a question, do I actually interpret anything meaningful from it? We entered into this problem with that hypothesis, but let's double check and make sure that's the case. So we did an Amazon Mechanical Turk study with about 50 participants. They saw a series of robot questions and they tried to answer based on just seeing these questions. What do they think the robot knows and what do they think the robot does not know? They had two different cases. One case, the robot knew about the ball and the bowl. Basically, it's supposed to avoid the ball and end up above the bowl, but it didn't know the right height. And then the second case, the robot did not know the right height. It didn't know to avoid the ball, and it knew about the bowl. So what you can kind of see here is the human's answers in these AMT studies, they actually correspond to what the robot did and did not know. So just based on the questions the robot has asked, the human is actually building up a pretty good mental model of what the robot is learning, right? So humans can learn just by seeing the questions the robot asks. Now, next thing we're going to do is we're just trying to roll out what we've done. So on the left, this is going to be the state of the art. This is a robot that is actually just trying to gather as much information as it can as quickly as possible. You've already seen this video. This is one where the questions, at least in my opinion, are kind of confusing and they show all different sort of trajectories. On the right, the robot is going to try to optimize for being both informative and revealing. It's going to try to gather information from you as quickly as it can, while also showing you what it has learned as it goes. I think one thing you might notice in this is that it actually doesn't take too many questions for the robot to figure out, hey, you want to stack these plates and you want to carry them close to the table. The robot quickly converges to that behavior. It repeatedly shows you, okay, I'm moving across the table and I'm stacking the plates with small variations. We then asked people, kind of what do you think? You saw these questions, what did they convey to you? And we did these different Likert scale surveys. I actually want to start off with what's on the right with this after questions. People said the behavior that the robot learned, whether it was asking just informative questions or informative revealing, they said the behavior the robot learned at the end of the day was the same. We offline, after the person asked all these questions, we then showed the human, hey, this is what the robot learned from you. This is the behavior the robot thinks you want it to do. And both times they're like, the robot got it. It knows what I want. So the robot is correctly collecting the information. This is what we want to see, right? We want to be able to figure out what the human wants. The key difference when we're also revealing is that now we can make this process a bit more transparent to the human. So for example, humans found these questions easier to answer. They thought the questions were more revealing about the robot's learning. And they also thought that the questions focused on a specific thing. Like they were like, hey, this question is asking me about height. This question is asking me about where to end up. Like they were like, these questions, they were able to interpret meaning from these questions. So to kind of summarize this, this part of the talk up, revealing robots, I think, definitely should consider what their behavior, what they actually do, their physical motions, their questions, their language, everything they do conveys information to people. I think part of this is because we as people are kind of assuming that these robots are going to act like people. We're treating them as if they were people. And so when we see behavior that's not what we expect, we start to misinterpret what the robots are, or even we build an incorrect model of what's going on. So it's important for the robots to keep this in mind as they're working with people, to show people what it is that they know and what they are still a little bit confused about. Okay, so that's this last arrow going back from the robot to the human to inform the human about what the robot is thinking. And that altogether is kind of at least one pass of this idea of human-robot interaction as a bidirectional information exchange. The robot learning from the human, the robot thinking about this human as a human, recognizing their limitations, and then conveying what the robot has learned back to the human. I want to end with a video that is not mine. This is from a planned city in Japan, where they're trying to show different ideas of how they think what human-robot interaction could look like within this city that they're developing. Here they've got these little, kind of like instead of Amazon, flying to your house or being dropped off by a car, they've got this underground network that's going to deposit goods, tools, foods, etc. They've got humans and robots working on streets, picking up different things. This is in the home. And the reason I show you this video is to kind of emphasize once again, just the diversity of different scenarios that humans and robots could work together. As we make these robots better, as we make them more intelligent, we're not going to always see them in very controlled and contained environments. We're going to see them in our world, around us. And so it's really important that these robots are clear, that we know what they're doing, they know what we're doing, that we have this bidirectional information exchange so that both of us are on the same page, we have the same mental model, and we can understand each other and work together. So with that, I'd like to thank my students. I've got Sohail and Anath here. And then in the bottom right, this is me trying to figure out what is going on. These are two students from my senior design project last year that are teaching me about a device that they have made. And I'd also like to thank the NSF for their support. So thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.